Dungeons in RPGs are an important aspect of the game to test your endurance and ability to complete them, with a focus on resource management and puzzle solving. The real challenge of those is not necessarily to defeat some random encounter, but to manage to go through and survive the wave of them with limited options to recover and stay healthy. You can say it's a marathon, not a 100-meter sprint. And usually at the end of it, there's the big boss fight waiting for you, which will be the real test of your fighting abilities. So final dungeons tend to be all of that and beyond. Final Fantasy is not the exception for these areas, and the focus I want to have on today's video is less on how they are made in terms of challenges, enemies or map design, but more on how important they are and the key role they have in the game's universe, in a more thematic and story related focus, as there's always a build up to finally reach that moment. The reason for talking about this is that as we are during the Final Fantasy XVI era, I was both satisfied and disappointed with the final dungeon here, as it had a big reason to be and represents something specific in the world and it's quite impressive, which I totally like, but once you enter that place it goes directly into the boss battles, with no big exploration time or anything like that. And that got me thinking about revisiting the rest of the game in that sense and checking the lore of the final dungeons of Final Fantasy. I decided to divide this video into two, for the main reason that I love to talk about this stuff, and realized that with 15 games and the expansions of the online ones, and some important spin-off I want to include, things would get longer than expected, so the best thing is to make two different ones. This first video will include from Final Fantasy 1 to 10, including the sequel, 10-2. Also please make sure to subscribe to the channel and all that stuff. I'm trying to reach the sweet 1000 mark, so I deeply appreciate it. Starting with the original Final Fantasy, we already have a cool thematic concept in this topic, as the final dungeon of the game is the same as the first one of the game. This is known as the Chaos Shrine, and the reason for it to be the case is that at the start of the game, in present time, the four Warriors of Light appear at Cornelia Castle and are entrusted by the king to rescue the Princess Sarah, who was kidnapped by the knight Garland, taking her hostage at the ruins of the ancient temple known as the Chaos Shrine. That is our first mission and boss fight that we have to beat, before going on the journey to bring light to the crystals in hand. At the end of this adventure, we talk once again with the Circle of Sages at the Crescent Lake, that have the sweet lore, and tell us that these four forces gather in the Chaos Shrine, as it is the geographic center of the four altars. So it's the place to go and strike the root of all darkness from there. But not only that, it's not just a matter of geographical location, the combined power of that light also breaks through the wall of time, and the Warriors of Light learn that they must travel to the past at the Chaos Shrine. The crystals empower the Dark Crystal within the shrine and open a time warp, with which the warriors travel 2000 years back to a point in time when the temple was intact, turning this shrine, but in the past, the final dungeon of the game. Inside it, besides the aesthetic characteristic that what was presented as ruins, now it's a full temple, the most distinguishing feature of it is the rematch against the main bosses of the game, the Four Fiends, as you travel through the different floors of it, in the most similar fashion to the boss rushes at the end of the Mega Man games. After traversing it and defeating the Four Fiends for a second time, the Warriors of Light will locate Garland and defeat the Dark Lord Chaos, ending the time loop and finishing this first game's adventure. Final Fantasy II has what I consider to be the best final dungeon theme ever, whose name is shared with the actual place, Castle Pandaemonium. This name refers to the capital of Hell, according to John Milton's epic poem Paradise Lost. So as you can guess, in FF2, Pandaemonium also has a link to actual Hell. For a better context, during the last section of the story, in our encounters with the main antagonist of the game, the Emperor, we managed to defeat him in combat once we fight at the Cyclone Fortress. This, however, doesn't mean that the Empire as a whole is defeated, as we get news that the Dark Knight Leon has taken the throne, so we head to the capital, Castle Palamecia. Once there, we get to see the arise of the former Emperor from the depths of Hell and what is going to become the final dungeon of the game, its capital, Castle Pandaemonium, that was taken by the Emperor itself upon his defeat at the Cyclone, and absorbing its powers, he is able to rise to the surface upon his return to the mortal world as the Emperor of Hell. His leader is so angry that he refuses to die. Its advent to the Earth again destroys and replaces Castle Palamecia. Pandaemonium in the world of Final Fantasy II was like a sealed castle in Hell by the most powerful spell Ultima, to avoid reach the mortal world and the many fiends that carry over. That's how the city of Mysidia was later formed, to keep Ultima and avoid the return of it. To reach it now, we can't fly to it anymore, but rather we take the Jade Passage before it that connects the world with the capital, acting as the first step of the final challenge. And for me, the dungeon itself has as its most remarkable thing, as I said before, its banger theme song above all things. For Final Fantasy III case, I will have to consider two different places, as the most iconic and known one is technically not the last or final one, as the location shifts to reach the final boss of the game, but both are worth including. The iconic place I'm referring to is the Crystal Tower, important enough to transcend games and be known in Final Fantasy XIV for example. In this world, this tower is the base of the main antagonist, but not the final boss, the wizard Sande, since it is where the imbalance of light and darkness is the strongest. And the concept of dark and light together in this game is quite important during the final events. One of the most remarkable features of this particular dungeon is its portal or access to an optional dungeon of the game, the Forbidden Land Eureka, which is truly the best name for an optional thing, and where you'll find bosses and better items. The gateway to it can be found in the bottom floor of the tower, and even in the game, Doga and Une, who will grant the key to it, will pretty much say that the best equipment to fight Sande is there. But back to the Crystal Tower, the initial approach to this place is pretty straightforward. You aim at it to clash against Sande, but once there, you'll find a mirror surrounded by 5 dragons. Once you look at it, the curse of the 5 worms activates and will be unable to move. To get out of there, Doga and Une will get all the cast members you meet through the journey to free you from the curse and go directly to defeat Sande. But after it, you have to fight the real final boss of the game, the Cloud of Darkness, and the result is not the best one, as we lose and need our friends again to recover, and the final quest shifts to the final dungeon this time, the World of Darkness. This is the point of no return of the game, so you know things are serious, and until this day Sakaguchi has to go apologizing for making it harder than the players in 1990 expected.
3のセーブポイントがラスターにないことは責められますね。本当俺無理と思いました。なんであんな風にしたんですかね。あ、ごめん。なんでこんな30年ぐらい経ってごめんなさい。
The story importance of this place in the world of Final Fantasy III is that it acts as the natural counterpart of our World of Light that Cloud of Darkness uses as base of its operations, and the source of darkness that broke the balance between the two worlds by starting an invasion. On it, as the most remarkable thing, is that there's the existence of 4 elemental crystals, a Final Fantasy staple, and along them there's the 4 Warriors of Dark, who help us, the Warriors of Light, to weaken the final boss by sacrificing themselves and grant us the opportunity to finally beat her. It's time we go even beyond, up to the freaking moon this time. The reason for it is that during the last stages of Final Fantasy IV, the main antagonist of the game, Golbez, summons, through the Tower of Babel, the Giant of Babel, from the moon itself, and after that we will have to awake the Lunar Whale with the help of the Mysidians, and with no stops, it's going to send us to the Red Moon, one of the 2 that exist for the world of this game, and making it one of the most fanciest airships that the series will ever have. The first visit to the moon is going to focus on meeting the Lunarian Fusoya, who will tell us about the truth of Golbez, the many crystals that there are, and more importantly, the true end boss of the game, Semus. And after destroying the giant, we return to this main palace in the moon and proceed to face the final dungeon of the game, the Lunar Subterrane, a massive cavern accessed from the Crystal Palace itself. The dungeon itself, besides the clear objective to reach and defeat Semus, also includes finding Fusoya and Golbez themselves, as they both went ahead for the core of the moon, descending through this cavern to defeat it, as they take the responsibility of the evil Lunaria's actions. Once there, the hatred of this entity transforms it into the final boss, Ceromus, that our party takes on after hearing the prayers of all of the party members we go through the course of the game. And the most distinguishable features that we can find here is the location of many items and famous weapons, like the Murasame or Masamune sword for Edge, guarded behind optional boss fights such as Dark Leviathan, or Cecil's ultimate weapon Ragnarok, behind also an optional boss, Dark Bahamut. So it's pretty weapon-centric behind optional power bosses, to get you prepared for the final challenge of the game. After many travels including visiting and merging 2 different worlds in Final Fantasy V, at the end, we have access to the final dungeon of the game, and the place where the main antagonist Exdeath went, the Interdimensional Rift, the space between dimensions where the void was sealed. A familiar name if you just finished Final Fantasy XVI, by the way. Originally in the world of this game, later known as Planet R, or the Merged World, a fiend called Enuo took control of the void, and upon his defeat, this had to be sealed instead, as it couldn't be destroyed, and for that, Planet R ended up splitting into two, along its crystals, into what we know in-game as Bard's World and Galoof's World, for references. This made both the Rift and the Void to be out of reach instead, which is X-Death's goal. Also known as a corrupted tree, through this game it will try to destroy the crystals, merge the world, and invade the Interdimensional Rift to get the power of the Void. First in his fight against the Warriors of Dawn 30 years before the start of the game, and during the course of it against the new Warriors of Light. After the successful world merge by X-Death, he took the Rift as his stronghold and freed the demons of the Rift, a set of powerful bosses to hunt us down, and absorbed many locations around the world by the Void, so our objective is to go face him there and stop him once again, sealing all his strong power. By itself, this place is a very cool concept as a game final dungeon, as the first stages or floors of it resembles the places that the Void absorbed before, so you have to go through places like the desert area, the forest of the Muggles, the library of the ancients, the phantom town of Lix, caves similar to the History Falls where one of the iconic super bosses Omega roams around, and even Castle Tycoon or the Dimension Castle here, with hidden pathways and a layout that shows that space is quite distorted around here. All of it as you fight the remaining demons of the Rift as bosses, before falling into the death and actual space rift, which is more distinctive and what the dimensional outer spatial cosmogenesis-like location would look like. After that, and finding bosses like Necrophobe, another who would sound familiar if you play 16, or the iconic Shinryu, it's time to take on the Evil Tree and end the game. And as a cute detail, this is the dimension someone is cheated when attacked with the spell Banish by a Time Mage, including when the mimic Gogo does it to himself in a brilliant move, or when X-Death banished Gilgamesh previously in the game and appears at the Rift as a last time. Final Fantasy VI has one of my favorite final dungeons in terms of how it's actually played, with the whole party splitting stuff and that, hey, you have like 15 characters and you're going to use most of them, okay? Not picking only 4 and leaving the rest in a dungeon. And that's a message I can get into for these big party member games. But besides that, this place is known as Kefka's Tower, and it's prevalent in this world since the big event that shifts the world completely, and mark it as the turning point of it and the game itself. During the end of that first part, the Emperor Gestahl and the main antagonist Kefka betray and attack Tamasa using the power of the Espers, and raise the floating continent, uncovering also the Warring Trial, the statues and deities that are the origin of magic. Once up there, to activate them, Kefka attempts to break the balance that these 3 petrified gods have, even killing the Emperor in the process. And while we can escape thanks to Shadow, breaking their magical field is what triggers what is known as the Cataclysm in this world, also referred to as the very day the world collapsed, as that imbalance of powers shatters the world's main continents into a series of islands and releases many powerful bosses like the 8 Dragons, Deathcase or Humbaba. When this new world of ruin starts to take shape, the plants refuse to grow, the wastelands are filled with monsters, and it gives place to the birth of this tower, formed from the debris of civilization when Kefka moved the Warring Triad out of alignment and destroyed the world as we knew it. And from atop his tower, Kefka reigns over the world as a god, using the light of judgment to wreak further destruction where he pleases, and for the next year making it also impossible to resist and confront him. Not exactly the prettiest castle for a fancy king or anything like that, it's mostly a largely mismatched, indistinct pile of dirt, stone and metal, with no sense of architecture, other than matching with the Empire aesthetic look like during the first half of the game, focusing on machinery and the steampunk looks that Final Fantasy VI is associated with. So for the whole second part of the game, while you are able to control the characters once again, this location constantly serves as that unreachable place, standing there menacingly, that you know you have to make it somehow or at some point, taking as long as you want, while you travel around the rest of the world searching for friends, with a note that you can only access to it through an airship by air. Which translates to you can reach this place only after you get Setzer. The dungeon itself, again as the party splits, also involves to fight individually against the 3 gods that Kefka reactivated, which also means putting an end to the whole concept of magic in this world, which would include half of Terra's self, as she was born from a human and an esper. And during the ending sequence, after battling Kefka, in what I think to be the best credits of a Final Fantasy game, we see the party escaping from this tower as it crumbles and falls. We have a similar situation in Final Fantasy VII, in the sense that the final dungeon of the game is first presented around the half of the story, and it stays there as the main location where the big baddie is resting. This time, the Cataclysm is not the unbalance of magic and the ascension of Kefka as a god reigning the world, but rather it's the summon of the meteor aiming at the planet by Sephiroth through the black materia. An eventual ascension to godhood, of course. One big difference though is that this place, the Northern Crater, is not an artificial place born from that key moment, but it's a location with at least 2000 years of history in this game's universe, as that's the place where back then the first asteroid fell into the planet, carrying with it the entity known later as Genova, back when the Cetra lived in the planet. And with some very cute addition in the bestiary of Final Fantasy VII Remake, we have information that the summon Shiva was part of it, or at least it was said that she once saved the planet from certain destruction by stopping a great wound with a glacier. And it would make sense if it refers to this place, which eventually was discovered by Professor Gast and his team, including a certain Hojo. During the course of the game, we are aware that the Northern Crater is our target after some little event that happened at the end of this one, and we go on our pursuit of Sephiroth and his possession of the black materia to stop him, heading to the north, climbing the cliff and reaching for the first time the planet's wound, where the main feature is not only how the livestream in this place flows strongly around it, but also the suspicious and cryptic black hooded men walk around following a path and muttering the words reunion for some reason. Such reason is that these men who have the Genova cells on them after being experimented are summoned by her will and her favorite son Sephiroth, whose real body is for the first time in this game shown here, as every other iteration of him was just a shapeshift form of Genova, although with real Sephiroth's will. The Cataclysm occurs as Cloud Strife's will is broken after learning or believing that he is also an artificial being from Sephiroth, and he was never pursuing him but rather being summoned by him. And after giving the black materia to him, the meteor is summoned, and the planet's protectors, the weapons, awake from their slumber as the world is threatened. Which, by the way, this should be the point where Final Fantasy VII Rebirth should end. If not, I'm going to be very sad. But this happens at the start of Disc 2. It's not until the end of it that the barrier summoned by Sephiroth is destroyed by the most powerful Mako Cannon attack from Rufus, and we have access to the final dungeon of the game, which is literally descending to the core of the planet through the Northern Crater once again. But it's not as complex or important as in Final Fantasy VI, because while you can decide which member goes with who or where, you'll follow only Cloud's party, and eventually when everyone reunites, you'll get the items that they collected, which you can also go and search for them yourself manually, fighting some very specific enemies like the zombie dragon and the best enemy skill of the game, or Kingdom Berries around, all for that last push to reach the final set of bosses, Genova and the many faces of Sephiroth. The other important detail from this final dungeon is that the last floor where the fight against Bizarro Sephiroth happens has the presence of the Holy Spell, the one Aerith was able to cast before death, but blocked by Sephiroth's will. So we have to unlock it so it can save the planet from the meteor, or at least that's the original plan. Now here's another main inspiration for me to create this video, and if I try to get everything in consideration, it might be my favorite final dungeon of all time, Final Fantasy VIII Ultimecia Castle. By that I mean the combination of the dungeon main quest, that is splitting the party into two so every character is used with different challenges, along with its environment. The PS1 mansion style is a classic one that I love in Final Fantasy VII, Resident Evil or even Digimon World. The layout, the puzzles around, the gimmick of losing your abilities until you unlock them in any order, the boss fights, the secret items, the super boss, the goddamn music, everything together makes this to me the best moment in the game and a type of charm that only the PS1 era has for me. But besides trying to pretend I know what I'm talking about from a designer point of view, let's focus on the lore of what this castle is. First of all, besides the obvious stuff of this being the lair of the main antagonist Ultimecia, this is a castle that appears only at the end of the game, as it is located in the future, the era where the sorceress actually resides, in which she wants to compress time into a world where only she can live. This spell is important, as while her intention is clear, it's never fully complete thanks to Elon, when she severs Ultimecia's mental link to the past, and the party is allowed to travel to her world through the partially compressed time and counterattack her plans by believing in each other's existence. The first location the party arrives in this future is the shore of what was used to be Edea's house, the orphanage that most of the party was raised in, and while you are witness of many numbers of Sith soldiers fallen around, which shows for how long they have been fighting her, there are massive chains anchored at the shore that leads you to the entrance of the floating castle. For the player's convenience, in this path there are also different portals for the past, so you can still play and explore the world without reaching a point of no return or something like that. Once there, as mentioned before, the party has to split into two to recover little by little all the abilities they lose at the start, and the charm of this castle is everywhere for my biased eyes. From the main hall, to the upper floors, to the chandelier crashing down and the trapdoors, to the courtyard with a nice little fountain, to the upshot of the stairways, some creepy treasure rooms with coffin, again big FF7 and Digimon World vibes, the art gallery with another big puzzle to solve and many Latin words, the floodgate and prison to uncover more keys, a suspicious hallway that surely has something hidden, the iconic chapel with the organ so you can put a test every piano ability that you learn at Tifa's house, and then the bridge and clock tower that leads to Ultimecia's throne. I have to say, while her time management is questionable, her aesthetic and design choices are my favorites. Eventually, the ultimate guardian for Scriver destroys it, but whatever, the impact is there. Final Fantasy IX has a very interesting final dungeon, especially in the sense that it's one that I could link with Final Fantasy XVI. And again, one I would praise because how similar conceptually it is, but also criticize how little it actually has in comparison with this one here. I am talking about the place known as Memoria. This place is only visible and accessible after the destruction of the other planet Terra, so its origin is unknown, and while it's unclear if Kuja himself summoned it, one could relate it to him with how comfortable he is in the crystal world that is beyond Memoria. It's probable that the surprising amount of mist after the planet was destroyed is also a reason for it, as its entrance and portal lies on top of the Ifa tree. What is known is that such tree is preventing the souls of Gaia to return to the crystal in the planet core. And this last bit has to do with what Memoria means. As you could tell with its name, this is a place of memories, as the souls, upon returning to the crystal, bring with them the memories of the life lived, allowing the latter to grow. And that's something that we can see and learn going through this dungeon in very interesting ways. At first, the places we visit and cutscenes we have tend to have and share known past events that involve the party members around. For example, Zidane, Dagger and Aiko are able to witness what was the destruction of Alexandria that happened earlier in the game, but Kina didn't see anything despite being all together, as they don't have those memories and weren't in the party when it happened. But the deeper and further in time we go, we discover that Memoria is made out of the collective memories of the planet Gaia as a whole. And in particular, we see how Zidane is the one that is able to see every event even when he wasn't actually there, because his nature as a genome, as Garland guides him during these sequences. Memoria goes so back in time of Gaia's history that we end up not only on what resembles purely an ocean floor, but also upon a swirling sphere of fire surrounded by emptiness, which represents Gaia's birth itself. The party climbs into space after defeating the last of a certain Chaos Guardian that you can find familiar, and if you want to be even more topical, you can make a connection about the 4 Fiends of Chaos of Final Fantasy I in a palace that represents history and memories as something very meaningful. But besides that, the last portal warps the party to the final location, backed up by Garland's final words to protect the crystal. This seemingly last endless labyrinth leads to the Crystal World, the beginning of all time. If you trace the root of all life, there exists one source, and that's the crystal, that lies here and Kuja is attempting to destroy and put an end to this world. That will be our final objective in this dungeon quest. Other distinguishable moments to highlight from here are the mentioned iconic bosses, but also secrets to find that include weapons like Cain's lance, super bosses like Hades, which comes with a secret shop after, or some secret access to card games, because why wouldn't you? You know, that final dungeon charm that we are used to so far. The objective in Final Fantasy X is pretty much clear from near the start. The world of Spyra and all life there is in constant threat of the monster known as Sin, a floating gargantuan whale-like beast flying around and cause of many catastrophic disasters around the world, as it's shown during the game itself, with the attacks on Kilika and the battle at Mushroom Rock Road. Sin gives to the inhabitants of Spyra this sense of unpredictable or unavoidable danger that any natural disaster could bring to us. But there's a bigger problem. While the teachings and the results of a successful pilgrimage made by a summoner and its guardians may be able to defeat Sin in an ideal scenario, after 10 years known as the Calm, Sin will revive as the world is affected by this eternal spiral that is Sin. Now, why am I talking lengthy about the main antagonist force of this game specifically? Because after we avoid taking the same measures that previous summoners did, and fight Sin in an unconventional way instead, we reach the final dungeon of the game that is actually situated inside Sin itself. For context, this doesn't mean that the dungeon is like exploring the whale in Pinocchio or the insides of Jabu Jabu in Ocarina of Time, but rather, Sin hosts the city of Sanarkand, known as Dream Sanarkand, inside it, and many of its locations of this dungeon allure to that place, more in sorrowful ways. For example, the first section you'll walk through has watery blue platforms with symbols of Yevon on the floor, known as the Sea of Sorrow. After that, there's a series of steps that lead to another platform where the last fight against Seymour takes place, called the Garden of Pain. After the fight, you'll get into the City of Dying Dreams, a maze formed by moving platforms and teleport glyphs, which hides the usual secret items and weapons. And as the player approaches what it seems to be an exit to the city, a large metal tower descends and blocks the path. By examining it, we move on to the point of no return, finding ourselves in an environment of crystalline floors and walls, whose gimmick is that we can catch or get different orbs to get new items, while also avoiding sneak attacks of different enemies that will trigger a fight. This place is called the Nucleus and is the last place before where the final fight takes place. This last place is more recognizable. The Dream's End is a ruined version of Sanarkand's stadium, which was briefly shown during the first sequence of the game, after Sin attacked and before waking up in Beside. The difference here is that everyone will meet Yekt, who was the last summoner Braska final Aeon to defeat Sin 10 years ago, and now he became Sin. Now the only thing we have to do is end this eternal cycle and have our surely happy ending. And finally, to end this video for the sake of its length, there's one more place to explore that works as the final dungeon in the sequel, Final Fantasy X-2. You could also say that there's arguably another super important location in the world of Spyra, or this universe as a whole, and that's the Farplane. To summarize, it works as an underworld, a gathering place for the dead. Their spirits enter the Farplane after they have been sent by a summoner, or by accepting their death. With the particularity that people can visit this place and by simply remembering the dead, a spiritual image of them will appear. Pretty cool stuff basically. Also kinda sad, but anyway. The reason it matters in this sequel is that in this post-Sin era of Spyra, the Farplane is connected to where the statues of the Faith were, and first time we visit this place is after Yuna fell in one of these, meeting a key character of this sequel, Chuyin, who basically uses another character's body as a host to escape deep into the Farplane. And eventually that place will be the sequence of locations that form the final dungeon. That officially starts once the Yuripa trio jumps into the Farplane from the Bevel underground. The final battle will be against both Chuyin and Bevel's ancient machina weapon, Begnagun, who he took away with him deep into the Farplane. The closer one gets to Begnagun, the Farplane takes on a less organic and more constructed appearance. The dungeon itself is a set of small musical puzzles that will punish you with a challenging fight if you don't solve it instead. I think in general it's a pretty interesting and reasonable choice to use one of the most interesting settings of the world of Final Fantasy X and turn it into the final dungeon of the game, exploring more of it. Thank you very much for watching this recap. Let me know your experience and preferences with these final locations, gameplay wise or not. Stay tuned whenever part 2 is coming. In the meantime, enjoy some Final Fantasy and I see you later.
I don't like your plan.
Love you.
It sucks.